discussing a topic that is perhaps the biggest challenge before our country. Some even call it a ticking time bomb because India's biggest advantage, its demographic dividend, threatens to turn into a demographic disaster. Consider this. 8 years ago, we were adding 10 lakh jobs annually and we're now adding just a lakh every year. That's down by 90%. And this when 1.2 crore people are joining the workforce every year. There is, frankly, no bigger crisis than the jobs crisis. The government has now constituted a top-notch panel under the leadership of the Niti Aayog Vice Chairman Rajiv Kumar to assess and recommend solutions.
Indeed. Now we welcome the move because politics and poll promises set aside, there is nothing, absolutely nothing more pressing for the government to focus on. And there are no two sides to this debate, but it's one that concerns each one of you watching this show and otherwise. And so we've decided to break format and do away with the politicians and instead debate the topic with some of the finest minds right here on the show this evening. We're also taking a departure and opening our phone lines for you to call in with concerns and observations. On the India development debate this evening, we will set an agenda for growth. I'm Supriya, Shrinate in New Delhi, and joining me all the way in Mumbai is my colleague Sandeep Gurumurthi.
हमारे देश में स्किल डेवलपमेंट विषय नया नहीं है, लेकिन पहले डिपार्टमेंटों में बिखरा पड़ा था. हमने आकर के इन सारे स्किल डेवलपमेंट को एक जगह पे लाया, उसका अलग मिनिस्ट्री बनाई, अलग डिपार्टमेंट बनाया और फोकस वे में स्किल डेवलपमेंट जो कि देश में ऐसे नौजवानों को तैयार करें जिसको कभी किसी पर निर्भर न रहना पड़े. मेरे देश का नौजवान जॉब सीकर नहीं, जॉब क्रिएटर बनना चाहिए. मेरा देश का नौजवान मांगने वाला नहीं, देने वाला बनना चाहिए. और इसलिए मैं आज जब स्वामी विवेकानंद जी के विचारों को याद कर रहा हूं, तब वो इनोवेशन के पक्षकार थे, अनुसंधान के पक्षकार थे. वो घिसी पीटी टूटी फूटी चीजों का बहिष्कार करने के लिए आह्वान करते थे. समाज जीवन भी तभी प्रगति कर सकता है कि जब नित्य नूतन हो. हमारे देश की युवा पीढ़ी, उसमें वो साहस चाहिए, वो जज्बा चाहिए जिसमें इनोवेशन का इरादा रहे.
Joining us on the show this evening, Vineet Nair, founder chairman of Sampark Foundation, former vice chairman of HCL Tech as well. Dr. Devi Shetty, chairman at Narayan Hridayalaya. Anu Madgavkar, partner at McKinsey Global Institute, and Maithili Busnurmat, consulting editor of ET Now. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us on the show this evening. We really hope to arrive at an agenda for jobs over the course of the next 40-45 minutes. Vineet Nair, I'm going to start with you. What's your own sense? Are we in denial on the jobs crisis? Because, you know, every now and then we sort of hear reports. Now there's a report from CLSA which seems to, indicate that the scare is exaggerated. They've surveyed the listed companies in the BSE 200 listed companies, and they report that there's been 4.2% growth in FY16 and 3.7% growth in FY17. And even in the government, one doesn't get the feeling that people are cognizant of the magnitude of this crisis. What is your own view, Vineet Nair?
I think, Sandeep, we are an emerging country, a growing country. And therefore, the number of jobs which need to be created will always be more than what we are creating. So actually, I'm not bothered about the numbers, whether we are creating more jobs than before or we are creating less jobs than before. What is true is we are not creating as many jobs as are needed by our youth. And therefore, the problem is real. The problem may be less than before or more than before. That is irrelevant. If I don't have a job today, I don't have a job today. I don't care what was happening 10 years ago. And the number of people who are entering, seeking jobs, compared to the people who are getting jobs, that divide is only increasing. And that is not just increasing in India, that is increasing across the world. So on one side, we have a young population with more job seekers On the other side, we have an emerging environment of jobless growth, led by technology, led by slowing growth in economy. And therefore, there is a semblance of a perfect storm being created for potential employees, and therefore there is a necessity to very closely and deeply look at this subject and try and answer what are the 3 or 4 or 5 things we can innovatively do to turn this threat, mind you, I call this a threat, into a huge opportunity for India.
All right, this is a threat that can perhaps turn a demographic dividend into a disaster. Dr. Devi Shetty, I'm going to come to you. How cognizant do you believe stakeholders are of this crisis or this threat? And I'm going to throw some numbers at our viewers here. We are down to creating 1.4 lakh jobs from the highs of 10 lakh that we created in 2009. And don't be surprised when I tell you this number. There are roughly 12.8 million Indians who are joining the workforce every year. How cognizant are stakeholders of the threat that poses before us? Dr. Devi Shetty.
I think we need to be very aggressive in creating jobs. Now, for this, you need to get all the stakeholders into confidence, mainly because government cannot be treated as a job creator, or the government, there is only a finite number of jobs government can create by themselves. Jobs are created by the private sector. I think there is a lot of discussions going on, and the Skill Council is doing a wonderful job, but the reality is that skilling is a big problem in our country, as you are aware, because education and knowledge can be imparted only by not-for-profit. The moment you say not-for-profit, you are talking about trust. And if you are looking at a not-for-profit venture to skill a few 100 million Indians, you have already restricted yourself, because how many people today are willing to write a check for 10 crore or 20 crore rupees and expect not anything in return? I am mainly interested in health sector. Health sector can emerge as the largest employer in the world. First of all, it is the world's largest industry, contrary to all of you think. It's a $8 trillion industry.
Right.
And for me, creating job is not about just creating a job which gives 10,000 or 15,000 rupees. We have to create jobs which can give lakhs and lakhs of salaries to young people.
Right.
And that is possible in healthcare industry.
Right. Dr.
Because
Shetty,
I'll
Dr.
give an
Shetty,
example. We built a hospital in Cayman Island.
Right, Dr. Shetty, if I may just interrupt you, we do want to touch upon healthcare in great detail, because we believe that is going to be crucial to agenda for jobs. But let me just get opening comments from my other panelists as well. Sorry to interrupt you, but I want to get in a word from Maithili as well. Maithili, the big picture to start things off, the government has a whole host of schemes, Startup India, Stand Up India, Make in India, Pradhan Mantri, Vikas Yojana. There are about a dozen schemes when we last checked, focused primarily at job creation, yet they're not yielding the sort of results that one would have anticipated. Should we wait, give these schemes a little more time, or do we need to get impatient and look at out-of-the-box ideas like Vineet was briefly talking about? Maithili.
No, I'd agree entirely with Vineet that it is a time bomb that is ticking away, and given the fact that the youngsters are no longer willing to wait, I think it's very important that government does something very concrete. The question is what? Because as you mentioned, the government has initiated a number of measures, but none of these seem to be giving fruit the way they should be giving. In fact, as Vineet again mentioned, the problem is not whether more jobs were created earlier or less jobs now. The problem is that we are just not creating enough jobs for the numbers who are seeking those jobs. And even the jobs that we are creating, they are just not quality jobs at all. They are barely subsistence level jobs. So what should government do? Should you just wait for economic growth to slowly filter down and then jobs are created, or do you consciously create jobs? I think we no longer have that option. We have to consciously create jobs. And one of the things that the government can do, one of the low hanging fruits really, is to focus perhaps on the export sector, which almost everybody now agrees is one of the reasons for the present slowdown. Get the exchange right, make it easier to do business, and as Dr. Shetty was saying, you will find the private sector investing, you will find jobs being created, because ultimately government alone cannot create jobs.
All right, government alone cannot create jobs. I'm going to take this across to Vineet Nair because I want to come back to Anu Madgavkar on the larger question about jobs and gainful employment. Are those two very different things? Vineet, let me ask you, we talk about job creators versus job seekers and how this whole aspirational thing is to become job creators. But is that going to be possible? And I'm not just asking a question, I'm backing it with facts. Look at Mudra Bank in 2016. It gave credit to about 13 million new entrepreneurs, and that translated into a job generation of just 0.2 to 0.4% per enterprise. So the record there has been very dismal. Can we at all be a nation of entrepreneurs alone?
I think there are some fundamental observation I'd like to put out there. First is, let's start with the whole cake. The whole cake is all the jobs in the world. We are having a jobless growth where GDP growth is growing, but the jobs are not growing, largely driven out of higher automation, higher productivity, and technology. So therefore, the only way India can create more jobs is either it grows much, much faster than the world in the areas which need jobs, which is very difficult, or it actually increases its market share of the worldwide jobs. So if you take the Indian IT, 4 million jobs were created in Indian IT. They were actually not created out of India GDP growth rates, but actually they were created out of taking market share away from the global markets. So the fundamental thing we need to understand is that the only way we can create these millions of jobs which is required is by increasing our share of global job share. That's the first thing. Now, how do we create it? I think it's a combination of government policies, it's a combination of aspirations of people to start businesses, and it's also, the most important, is to look at existing businesses and fuel them with energy, fuel them with some steroids. Case in point, you rightly said that the startup businesses, which are very glamorous, and tons and tons of VC money is going into that, and government has also announced very interesting schemes for startups, worldwide have not created as many jobs as the small and medium sector has. So if you look at one side, the small and medium sector, which actually created about 70% of the jobs over the last decade in India, and see what kind of policies we have brought in for the small and medium sector, and can we give the same focus on startup, what we are giving on startup entrepreneurs, on small and medium enterprises, I think we will see a far better return compared to what we are seeing so far. So Mr. Modi is absolutely right that we need more job creators, and the fact that industry leaders would have to take higher ownership. But I believe that we can cooperatively with the government create an environment, create a policy framework where we encourage the right sets of people, and we will get time to talk about specific suggestions there, so that we are not just focused on one set of people, entrepreneurs, and then judge them with success and failure. Their job is wealth creation. Their job is not job creation.
All right.
But if we focus on some of the other segments and encourage them and incentivize them, I think we'll be successful.
That's a fair point. And I think we've sort of got a wide range of opening comments, but let's now get down to specifics like Vineet indicated there. I'm going to come to you, Anu Madgavkar. First big point, on the agenda that we believe is, incentivizing large corporates. Do you believe there is a case for the government to provide incentives for large corporates, large conglomerates to, go ahead with job creation? Vineet spoke about the IT sector as well. These are sectors that have created massive jobs on the back of, incentives being provided by the government. Is there a strong case for the government to provide incentives for large corporates to create jobs? Anu.
I think to answer that question, one has to really look at the data. And I think even before we come to discussing the crisis of job creation in India, one has to really talk about the crisis of paucity of reliable and granular data on job creation. A lot of the numbers that we hear, which is the 1.5 lakh jobs being created each year, or this question around, should large corporations actually be given incentives to create jobs, I think they betray a lack of understanding of the real dynamic of the labor market based on the data that we see from much larger household surveys that come out from time to time and are much more reliable than the much narrower enterprise surveys on which some of these conclusions are based. So if you look back even over the last 4 to 5 years and look at that data and think about where in size and scale lots of jobs have actually been created in India, what we find is that if you look at data from 2011 to 2015, which is actually the last available sizable survey of labor market that exists in this country, we do find that contrary to the notion that there has been jobless growth, there's actually been a very large transition or shift of labor away from the agricultural sector and into sectors that are higher productivity and generate higher wages for labor. And in India's case, these sectors have been typically construction, trade, transportation, and then hospitality and tourism. So these services sectors have actually been the large job creators. And a lot of these workers or enterprises are actually, I would say, small and medium and even very small or micro enterprises that have actually been engaged in these activities. I think one important sort of global trend that I'd like to just place on the table in this context is that even in economies such as the US and in Western Europe, which are structurally much more advanced, where labor has transitioned out of farming decades ago, even in those economies, at least our research suggests that between 25 and 30% of the workforce today is engaged in some form of independent work. Independent work suggests workers who are basically operating in an autonomous way, who are not governed by official job contracts, don't earn a fixed amount of money, but get paid based on the piecemeal work that they may do. And as many as 70% of these workers who are independent in nature are actually doing this on a voluntary basis because they want to be engaged in this kind of work. So there is a whole sort of micro enterprise revolution almost sweeping even developed countries. And we need to think about not just therefore large enterprises and small enterprises, but whole value chains. So large enterprises can work with strings of autonomous workers, bring to them some of the discipline, some of the higher skills, training, productivity that goes with being associated with a large enterprise without necessarily actually employing them in the way we think about a traditional job.
I got that. I got that. So you basically talking about a value chain that laces the large with the small and the micro enterprises. But Dr. Shetty, I'm also going to ask you this question. When we talk about job creation, when we talk about job guzzlers, when we talk about job generations, we must look at the large corporates, the big business houses that they are called. Do you believe there is a case to perhaps incentivize them to create these jobs? And I'm not taking anything away from what Anu Madgavkar says, that this has to be a value chain, but I'm just talking about pure play large corporates. Is there a case for incentives?
See, unless there is a business opportunity for them to hire more people, industries are not going to hire. Just because government will give some tax incentive, don't expect industrialists to hire people. It's not going to happen. But the real picture is that already existing industries are starving for people. I'll give an example of my profession, the healthcare industry. This country desperately requires 2 million doctors, 6 million nurses and 6 million medical technicians. This is what is required in India today. If they are available, most of them will be hired without any problem. Now let's look at outside India. This is what I am more interested right now, because that's where you get the highest payment for one skill and the effort. Across the world, they are desperate for at least 20 million healthcare workforce, doctors, nurses, medical technicians, paramedics. And you look at rest of the world, whether it's a US, Europe, they don't want our software engineers, they don't want our the lawyers or business people, but they are all desperate for Indian doctors, Indian nurses, Indian medical technicians. They can find job anywhere in the world. There are studies today published by Harvard Business School that Americans who are treated by Indian doctors live longer than the Americans who are treated by American doctors.
Right.
This is the reality. This is the brand we have built for Indian doctors.
Sure.
But time has come for us to encash on that. If you want to encash, we have to dramatically change the education system of the country. Without that, you are not going to skill 300 million people.
All right, it's a very good point you're making, and let's get to it now. I mean, we wanted to focus on healthcare, and Maithili, before I come to you, I want to get a word in from Vineet. Vineet, you've got a radical suggestion, because even though you've represented the IT sector for years, unlike the rest of the brethren that's still sort of talking up the fact that this is going to be a huge job creation opportunity, you don't believe that's the case, and it's time to look at another sector. It's time to look at the next IT, and you believe it could be healthcare.
Yeah, so a couple of points. Number one is that I do believe that incentive structures drive employment. And I personally believe that temporary employment or contracted employment is a dangerous trend, predominantly because it is putting less in the hands of the employee and putting the employee at the risk, not getting insurance covers, not getting a lot of benefits. So I think if the government, if you really go back to industries which were created, like the IT industry, it was created because of tax incentive structures, SEZ incentive structures. So therefore, I truly believe if job was important, I would believe that there are some specific incentives which could be created and saying, hey, if you guys add up another 100,000 jobs, this is the kind of incentive will flow in. And the moment the incentive flow in, I'm sure the business guys will find opportunities to do that. And you must remember that if you set up, Indian IT is setting up centers in Michigan, in Shanghai, in all the places, and governments are giving them free incentive, 1 year free salary for people, free training, free buildings, free rent, free electricity. So we are in a competitive world. But coming specifically to what beyond IT, because IT has a limitation, did a phenomenal job creating 4 million jobs. You're absolutely right. I believe there are 3 big ideas, and we can go into them a little later. But the first big idea is shipbuilding across the coastal lines of India. We have very good coastal lines. We have electricity which is cheap. We have land which is cheap. We have labor which is cheap, and we should create shipbuilding. Education in SEZs for global students. And the third, and I absolutely agree with Dr. Devi Shetty, healthcare. But the only difference is I would not like to ship healthcare workers to US and Europe. I would like to set up 500 acres, 1,000 acres, healthcare cities which are SEZs, where you pay no duty for joints, no duty for heart valves, nothing at all, building constructions, no duty. You create the lowest cost healthcare delivery system in the world, delivered out of Uttarakhand and Sikkim and Ladakh and all those places. And you created the biggest export industry. You don't export people, but you export the services. So I truly believe that we have something very big on healthcare if we approach it identical to the way we approach the Indian IT, that we create opportunities around scarcity for good people across the world by delivering services and not people.
That's a very out of the box thinking there. But before I take it to Devi Shetty, who's a stakeholder in that sector, Maitli, I'm going to come to you. Is there a case for doing some such thing for healthcare? And can healthcare really be the big next IT for India? I mean, 74 lakh new jobs is what one is estimating by 2020 in this sector. But I'm just asking you, SEZs, in far-flung places, actually building an ecosystem for healthcare. Is that worth it? Is that where we perhaps need to move?
Well, Supriya, it is a fact that unlike the Western countries for which manufacturing was a big job giver, and in fact people were able to move out of farming into manufacturing, that age is gone. Today, even though we talk about Made in India, Make for India and all the other schemes that the government has announced, the fact is that with increasing automation in manufacturing, there is a limit to how many jobs can be created in manufacturing. So, we will have to look at alternate sectors and services, because services is heavily dependent on human labor, and this is where we need to match skills with the numbers of people that we have. So, healthcare, tourism, the care industry, hospitality, these are the sectors which offer a great deal of promise. Unfortunately, because unlike capital, which is mobile across borders, labor is not mobile across borders, because countries have own protectionist barriers. They are very particular about allowing people free migration. As you know, in WTO, that has been a big issue of what can we do. Movement of natural persons is something on which things are absolutely stuck, and as we are seeing with Trump, there is just no way those kind of restrictions are going to be eased. But there is enough scope to do these kind of services within India itself. But the only thing we need to do is to be able to match the skills with the kind of jobs that we desperately need and can provide. So that really is where the challenge lies, and government's role must be limited to being a facilitator, to make it easy to do not just business but also services. Automatically the jobs will come.
Fair point. Dr. Devi Shetty, come in there. The healthcare market at worth about $100 billion by 2020, estimated to be at about $280 billion, a CAGR growth of about 23%. Medical tourism, we all know the opportunity. We're seeing almost 25% growth on a year-on-year basis. Can India be a low-cost capital, healthcare capital to the world? Like the point that Vineet Nair made, can we, you at the Narayan Hridayalaya have demonstrated to the whole world on how you can build scale offer quality and do it at a very, very affordable price. Can we sort of replicate that model on a nationwide basis and have these so-called healthcare special economic zones where, people can come together and whole ecosystem sort of comes together to create India being a low-cost healthcare capital of the world? Is that possible?
It is definitely possible, but you must realize that when somebody is sick, they would like to be treated in their own country, preferably in their own city. There are limitations by which a large number of people will travel across the world for the healthcare, unless it is for elective procedure like a joint replacement or a cosmetic surgery. I'll give one example. We built a hospital in Cayman Island, which is less than an hour away from US border, from Miami, and we have close to about 100 and odd people working there. All of them are from India. Let's look at a typical Indian nurse who has 3 years of experience in ICU in our hospital. She gets about maybe 30,000 rupees salary. She works very, very hard. Her colleagues working in her contemporaries working in our hospital in Cayman Island draw close to 2 lakh rupees. And the quality of life they enjoy, the kind of money they are able to remit, it's unmatched. We have to look at, it's not just about creating the jobs. We should look at how much foreign currency we can earn just by exporting medical, the skilled people in healthcare industry. I'll give you one example. Cuba, which is a small country, sends 45,000 doctors to Central America, and together they remit $9 billion a year. That's the kind of potential to earn foreign currency. When we create strategy for creating jobs, we have to look at, can particular industry like health sector remit $100 billion a year back to India? Can we create people, the skilled people, to make it happen? It is possible. We produce 26 million babies a year. We can produce millions of doctors, nurses, medical technicians. What is holding us back? What is holding us back is our Victorian system of training people. We have to change the way doctors are trained, nurses are trained, medical technicians are trained. We have to look at what is the requirement in US and Europe and train the manpower. And if we can do that, we can not only create millions of jobs, we can create millions of extremely well-paying jobs. That is what is important.
Fair point indeed. Anu, I'm going to come to you on construction, and we've spoken about healthcare at large, but construction, and I know you mentioned construction when you gave that answer. If construction grew at 10%, roughly 6 million new jobs would be added every year. That's the ballpark number that we work with. Now, between 2009 to 2014, when those big jobs were being created, 50% of them actually came in from construction. But it brings me to the whole policy and whole private sector part of this debate, that private sector is just not investing. And because it's not investing, obviously, and construction is a very, very capital intensive expenditure in that sense. So all I'm asking you is that will jobs in construction be held hostage to the fact that private sector is not investing, and unless that virtuous cycle picks up, there will be no job creation there?
Yeah, so I would certainly agree that for a country as large as India and as diverse, we need multiple engines firing in terms of job creation. We have a huge sort of supply of labor force across virtually every skill category. And I'm a big believer in the segment of sort of the high skill, knowledge enabled jobs that, for example, the healthcare sector can generate, and that's very meaningful both for our economic objectives as well as for that segment of high skill workers. But we need multiple engines, and from that perspective, one of the biggest absorbers of the transitional labor force coming out of agriculture is actually construction, and this has been the experience of economies worldwide. Now, in India, a lot of the construction expenditure in the last 3 to 4 years has actually been on the public sector or the government side. And it's had sort of, we think, two positive effects, one direct and one indirect in terms of its labor force impact. The first has been clearly to create jobs and employ some 6 to 7 million people based on the heightened spending that the central government's been doing in roads and other aspects of infrastructure. But there is a second indirect effect, which I think is still to play out, which is that the improved physical connectivity as well as improved electricity and energy supply in several parts of the less developed states and less developed interior parts of India. So for example, if you look at the way Bihar or UP or Chhattisgarh have actually brightened up in terms of our night lights image, what it suggests is that with that connectivity, with that better infrastructure, there will be more opportunities for gainful employment even outside of the actual job of building that infrastructure. So there is a whole set of income generation and job creation opportunities that come as a spin-off benefit.
Okay.
That said, it is important for the private sector to kick in. Infrastructure building can't be just a government or a public sector affair.
Fair point. Okay, I want to quickly cover a few more topics before we take a few questions from our viewers. We want to wrap this leg of the discussion at 9:40. Vineet Nair, I'm going to come to you first now, which is on, Dr. Devi Shetty also spoke about the fact that, we need to skill our workforce. And, while the government, again, has the intent with the Skill India mission and a whole host of programs, yet it's not translating into much benefits on the ground for corporate India. Is it because there is no sort of, they're not at sync? What the skills that industry needs is not the skills that are being imparted by all these, by the ITIs of the world and by all these skill, development initiatives of the government. How do you sort of bring them, how do you bring more parity between what the industry needs and what the government can provide as skills to people?
I think Sandeep, this is a great question and great, one has to put a great thought about it. First is, the good news is that skill is the center of attention for the current government, and therefore they need to be applauded for the progress they have made. But the question, we always need to benchmark India and India performances against what is expected, not what we have done compared to past. And if you see, the needle has to move a lot more. And there are a couple of suggestions I have. Number one is, The fact is that the industry bodies should be given charter to own and spend money in developing skills for their industry. So as even Dr. Devi Shetty is talking about, is the fact that we do not have the kind of people, despite the fact that the industry has education under their control and industry can take high responsibility, like the Indian IT industry took. You must remember, Indian IT hired civil engineers, mechanical engineers, non-engineers, BCom graduates, and trained them to be IT engineers. So we played a role in skill development, predominantly because the industry body was organized, the whole industry was organized, and we went back to the education institutions, signed MOUs with them, and systematically created 4 million skills which did not exist in the past. So if we are serious about skill development, then I think the industry body and the industry needs to be involved. The funding of skill development should be routed through the industry body. They are responsible industry bodies. So that's the first part of it, of how we can get the relevant skills in relevant geographies, because industry bodies are owning it. They will also own the curriculum and make it relevant, because it will be an extension of backward integration of their organization, exactly the way it happened in IT. So will it take too much time to create new nurses? I don't think so. Doctors, yes. I mean, that's a big transformation to be done. But in many other areas, crane operators, construction operators, drivers, plumbers, electricians, a lot of that can be owned by the industry. And the last is, I think we need to go back to our schooling system and try and see if we can issue skill certification at the schooling level itself. By the time the kid is in grade 10th or grade 11th, 12th, can the industry take responsibility of issuing certificates at the schooling system itself, so that there is an accelerated progression of the student away from agriculture, away from construction and labor, straight into the skill pool, and that will be very interesting. So you're absolutely right, more can be done in the skill area.
Right.
Good work is being done, but more can be done if we are a little more innovative and apply our mind to it.
And perhaps get the whole apprenticeship model that Korea and Germany follow. I get your point there, but I'm going to shift quick focus to agriculture, Maithili. We need to address that. Agricultural productivity is a big cause of concern. Almost 50% of the population is still dependent on that. 26 million jobs in agriculture did shrink, and 33 million did get created in some new sectors that Anu spoke about earlier. But my question to you really is, how are you going to arrest the migration of agricultural workers to non-farm, jobs? And the other part of this debate has to do with the fact that, can we afford to look at farm versus non-farm, but non-agri, but non-farm jobs separately? And has GST been a big disincentivizer there? Because what has it done? Non-farm is going to be taxed, whereas pure agriculture will not be.
Well, Supriya, let me answer your second question first, because we're already seeing, even within the farm sector, non-farm income is becoming increasingly important, because even if you look at GDP numbers for the latest quarter, it is a non-farm sector which is contributing almost 50% of the sheer crop production of the total agriculture GDP, rather than the income coming out of food grain production. So non-farm sector, small jobs, small businesses, animal husbandry, fishiculture, poultry, all this is becoming important in the agriculture sector. So clearly it is not just food grain production which is important in agriculture, but increasingly non-typical agricultural occupations are becoming important. As to the first question that you said, that should we allow migration from agriculture, there is no alternative, because today what is happening is that still close to 60% of the population is still dependent on agriculture, whereas the agriculture share to GDP is shrinking, is just about 15 to 16%. So there is just no alternative but to remove people out of agriculture and put them in alternate, more profitable jobs. As Anu mentioned, construction is the easiest option, because there you have not too much of requirement of skill. So you have these low skill jobs where typically you could take people out of agriculture and put them in construction. But construction, because it is low paying, low skill, cannot be an answer. Ultimately, we have to move people into more high skilled jobs.
Right.
But this is where we need to improve not just the skilling part of it, but even basic primary education. Look at what we see with Pratham, Asar. What do they tell us about the quality of our school education?
Right.
So I think it has to be an attack a war footing on all fronts.
Okay, it has to be attacked on a war footing on all fronts. Okay, my guests, I'm just going to urge you to stay with us just for a few more minutes, because let's take in a few queries from our viewers as well. Like we said, we've opened the debate for comments and queries from our viewers. First viewer calling in is Santosh Golecha from Chhattisgarh. Thank you, sir, for calling us here at ET Now. And happy to know that you at Chhattisgarh are watching ET Now. Tell us, what's your question, comment, observation? Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Golecha.
Yeah, because I feel that small enterprise is a big source of the job creation. It is mostly family-owned business. Rules for small job creators should be self-sustainable because of lot of complications of unnecessary rules and regulations. It is forming and creating the system that job creators are moving from job creators are moving to the search of the job.
All right. So what you're saying is job creators are moving away from India to other countries because of the bureaucracy and because of the rules and regulations. Dr. Devi Shetty, you started off as a medium-sized entrepreneur. Do you agree with the sentiment of a viewer there, saying that the ease of, clearly this is an indication that for small and medium enterprises there is no ease of doing business, Dr. Shetty?
You see the quantum of, let's look at managing hospitals in small towns, tier 2 cities. It is the hardest thing to manage enterprises in small towns where there is a great opportunity to create jobs, because there are quite a few rules, regulations, and they are becoming rigid. So essentially my suggestion to policymaker is that please don't enforce first world regulatory structure with third world infrastructure. This has been the problem, because let's look at the healthcare in tier 2 cities. People don't have the money to pay for the quality healthcare which they deserve. They have some money, so hospitals to some extent have to compromise to ensure that some decent healthcare is provided to them. The moment you thrust all the quality standards, they won't be able to maintain, not because they are not capable. Someone has to pay for it, and people simply do not have the money to pay for it. So this is our problem. We can go for very high quality products and service. The question is, can our clients pay for it?
Fair point indeed. I've got another caller. Karan CJ Pal from Chandigarh is joining us. Go ahead, sir, your question.
Gentlemen, we can create jobs in the real estate sector, infrastructure, and the irrigation projects. There is a huge scope for creation of the jobs. The second is that each city in India requires a small IT hub where the local children can be employed immediately. This is what my suggestion is.
Okay, your suggestion, Anu, you want to react to this suggestion, an IT hub? I thought IT wasn't hiring as much anymore. But nonetheless, I think the point that you made about construction kind of resonates here as well. Anu, you want to take a quick 30-second answer to this before we slip into a break?
That's true. I think on the construction side, certainly affordable housing is one huge segment with a lot of latent demand that we can tap. On the IT side, I agree that there is a productivity uptick happening in IT all the time, due to which it's more difficult to sustain lower value jobs. But that said, there is actually a big space for all sorts of e-enabled service centers, and we're actually seeing a very large number of these opening up in semi-urban and even rural areas, where e-services are actually provided out of these hubs to the local population. So that's another untapped opportunity, we think.
All right, we'll leave it at that. I'm afraid completely running out of time on this leg of that debate. Thank you so much to all my panelists. Anu, thanks for joining us. Vineet Nair, Dr. Devi Shetty, Maithili Busnurma, thank you for joining us with that perspective on the agenda for jobs. There's so much that we need to discuss, and we hope to make this a topic that we will continue to have conversations of and continue to drive change in policy making. Thanks so much for being with us on the India Development Debate. We'll slip into a short break. On the other side, Amitabh Kant joins us to answer some of the suggestions made by this panel right here on ET Now. Back in a moment with an exclusive chat with Amitabh Kant. Keep it with ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/ETNow.